Good night and welcome to another live edition of In Focus, brought to you by the Barbados Government Information Service. I'm Sharifa Medford-Gilkes, and tonight we're zeroing in on a topic that affects our nation and the region, hurricane season. June 1st marked the start of this critical time of year, and as we've seen before, preparation isn't just important, it's life-saving. In this episode, we're pulling back the curtain on how our nation prepares, responds, and recovers when faced with severe weather or national emergencies. Who decides when the country shuts down? What systems are in place to protect citizens? And how do we get back up and running after the storm has passed? Joining us tonight are 5 key voices in this national effort. First, we will be talking to Captain Robert Harewood, Deputy Director of the Department of Emergency Management, Samelka Jackman, Senior Meteorologist with the Barbados Met Services, and Station Sergeant Jennifer Gibson of the Barbados Police Service. And later, we will chat with Reverend Stephen Scott, Deputy Chief Education Officer for Planning and Curriculum, and the Deputy Shelter Warden, and Color Sergeant Hilroy Stout of the Barbados Defense Force. Ladies, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw the first question to Samelka. I want to know, explain to us how long in advance you may get a warning of a possible system, and then what are the steps then that the Met Office takes before the public is informed.
Okay, so at the Met Office, we monitor the weather conditions continuously 24/7 throughout the year. So what we look to see, especially during hurricane season, is that potential for the development of tropical cyclones to the east of Barbados. I mentioned the word tropical cyclones. That's just any tropical storm, depression, hurricane, etc. So I might use the term interchangeably throughout the conversation. So because we monitor that, if we see that potential risk for something impacting the region, we would normally just give the public a heads up. Of course, we also give the Department of Emergency Management the heads up so that they can start things in place for the government's response. So that's what we normally do in relation to that. We would also then do an information statement as things become a little more clear regarding any potential impact for Barbados. And then closer to the timeline, if we expect a system to impact us within 48 hours, we would issue a tropical storm or hurricane watch, and then a warning when it's within the next 36 hours.
Okay, so at which point do you actually bring in the Department of Emergency Management?
From the beginning. So once there is that potential for anything, we would engage the Department of Emergency Management. Those DM is our closest stakeholder because they take it from what the impacts could be, which is the Met Office, then to what the response should be, and they mobilize the country accordingly.
Okay, you explained the term cyclone earlier. Explain some of the other terms that may be thrown around when a system is approaching. We hear warning, we hear watches, and people are still a little, phased about what means what.
Right. So when we talk about a watch, it means that is the possibility for the impact. So watch is always connected to the possibility and the likelihood of something happening. So you may get a watch for a system, especially if there is like that medium chance of impact for us. So there is the possibility whether it's timeline. So time will take into account, like the further out you go with the forecast, the more variability there is. So that's where we'll be at watch in relation to the time. We also think about watch in relation to the potential impacts. So if, for example, we can use last year with Beryl, we would have had a tropical storm watch and then a hurricane watch for a longer period. So when we had that hurricane watch is because we didn't necessarily have high confidence that we would get the hurricane force conditions. But there was still that likelihood in there. So we said, well, you'll have a watch, so the potential for that is happening. So that's where watches come in. But then warnings are when you have high confidence that you will get a particular impact. So sometimes, and I think last year this happened again with Beryl, and I guess there was some uncertainty, we had a tropical storm warning and a hurricane watch in effect at the same time, which meant we we expected and we had high confidence that you would get tropical storm conditions over Barbados, but there was the potential for maybe hurricane conditions. So then that alert system, and that is really critical for then DM and the police and the other responders to understand, like, okay, we have to do this or we have to do that so that we'll be better prepared.
Okay, so Captain, here when you get that information now, what are the steps taken now from the DEM's perspective?
Okay, so I want to start by saying we coordinate a national emergency management system. So it's not necessarily the DM alone. So once we get that information from the Met Office, either the Honorable Prime Minister or Minister of Home Affairs will convene what we call a pre-strike meeting. And the national system, the members of the national system will come together and they will discuss what plans they would have had in place or they have in place, what's the status of those plans, and are they ready to go. So that pre-strike meeting normally happens at the watch phase. Agencies that we involved there would be, for example, the Transport Board, Ministry of Public Works and Transport, Government Information Service, of course, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, and a number of the stakeholders within the national system. And they have to look at everything that they're responsible for example, health, responsible for the health of Barbados, shelter is the responsibility of the Ministry of Education. So they look at, are the shelters ready? When are the shelters going to have the shelters up? Because if this event is happening during school time, schools have to close in time for shelters to be in place. Some of the shelters have to be installed or placed on the windows at a particular time. Who's going to place the shelters on? Generally, it is the teams from the Ministry of Public Works and Transport. Our drains cleared. So there are a lot of things that they have to then run through quickly to make sure that everything is ready for the impact. So this is what happens when we get that bit of information from the Met Office.
You mentioned a number of organizations, Samalka would have alluded to them as well, but who actually is responsible for the shutdown?
So legally, the shutdown can only be called by the Minister of Home Affairs or the Prime Minister of Barbados. Okay. I believe it is 2019 that Cabinet approved the shutdown procedure, and is a staged process. So once the committee meets or the national system meets, then it also look at when it's best to shut down. Shutdown depends on a lot of things. So, for example, one of the things that we measure for the shutdown period is how long would it take for the Transport Board vehicle bus to get to the furthest place in Barbados and back, so that the driver can put the bus up at a depot and get home safely. That is one of the things that's considered during the shutdown. Mm-hmm. How long would it take for, if you were running a supermarket or a gas station or hardware store, what is the time period in which you need to close that your staff can get home safely and batten themselves down in preparation for the impact?
Okay, is there like any legislation in place for like persons who don't adhere to the shutdown?
I want to say no. So there's legislation and there's commitment to do something. So the act is a legal document, but generally there's no recourse if you don't do what you're supposed to do. And again, I want to impress upon persons that your safety is your responsibility. So you shouldn't have a case where people are penalizing you for not doing what you're supposed to do to save your own life, for example.
Okay, I just want to remind the audience that you can still submit your questions and comments, and we will be sure to pose them to the members of our panel. Sergeant Gibson, yes, can you please explain the role of the police during this stage when we are now getting ready for shutdown? There's going to be communication about the pending system.
Okay, so from the get-go, we monitor based on information from Met Services. Our operations control is always monitoring, because behind the scenes, before you even get to the shutdown part of it, there's lots of things for us to do, and our role is very dynamic and multifaceted. We have to ensure our own organizational resilience, because we are a response agency, and we need to make sure that, you know, on our side of the fence, everything is okay so that we can actually respond if we need to. In preparation for a shutdown, we know that the shutdown is coming. Then that mobilizes our traffic management plan for Bridgetown, as well as the other significant towns on the island. So 6 Roads, Oil Stains, Whole Town, Spike Sound. The traffic management is mobilized, and we try to get persons out of those areas safely and efficiently. Now that we have the added support of drone coverage, we can use that as well to give current situational awareness to how the shutdown, how persons are moving out. So if there are any bottlenecks, anything like that, we can attend to that. But persons will be placed at junctions to control that. The stoplights would be put on blink so that, you know, you get that movement still going. And we keep patrols going to alert persons that, you know, the national shutdown is coming, so they need to do what they need to do in order to honor that.
These plans that you would have mentioned that you all will have in place, are these updated regularly? Because I mean, things are changing drastically each year.
Yes, we try to update them regularly because, like you say, things are changing. Infrastructure changes, roads change, new buildings are coming up, and we need to change with that so that we can actually you know, have a document that is current and it actually works. Because it makes no sense to us, you know, using the same thing from years past, but it doesn't actually work for the time that we're using it in. So yes, we do that.
I think I can say something on the plans, if I may. So one of the things that the Act requires as well is that all the agencies submit their plans by the 1st of April to the Ministry of Home Affairs through the DN. And those plans are reviewed by the Council, Emergency Management Advisory Council, and then they review there, and then they go off to Cabinet for the final review and I want to say commitment. So all the agencies do have their plans, and the plans is what they have to use as a guide, because oftentimes we believe that the plan is the gospel, but we can only write plans for what we know can impact upon us. So for example, a different plan has to be written now for the fishery sector, given what happened during Beryl. That was not in their plan before. So just use that as an example where every time you are impacted, you have to relook at your plan and tweak your plan to suit the type of event that you were just impacted by. Because one of the things that we always know is that preparedness is a journey and it's not a destination. So you can continue to prepare every time there's an impact. You look at what has happened, you sort of prepare yourself for the next time.
Okay. And we have a question now from the audience from Abijah on YouTube. The Prime Minister said that we need our own satellite projection. Can you elaborate on this? Is anyone aware of this?
I'm not quite sure exactly what the person is asking in relation to satellite projection. But currently at the Met Office, we have a number of tools to monitor current weather conditions. So there are satellites in space and generally belong to the larger countries, but they do have global coverage. I like to say also that meteorology is one of those fields where that global network works really well. So the globe is separated into regions. Different countries have responsibility for different things within the region, and we collaborate really well. Some larger countries have responsibility. So for example, the National Hurricane Center, which deals with hurricanes within the Atlantic Basin, that is in the US, but there are smaller countries within the Caribbean that have responsibilities within the region as well for different areas. So meteorology is that collaboration for sure, and it works really well. So for going back to the satellite element of things, there are the satellites in space that have full coverage over the globe. Here at the BMS, we do have a satellite receiver. So we receive the satellite data and then we have that output internally. We of course have our radar, which we would have upgraded recently. We also have I would say local elements of observation, whether it's on the land, automatic weather stations. We've expanded into our marine space as well with the drones and then the buoys, which were launched earlier this year. So we have a number of tools at our disposal to monitor what's happening, whether it's very close to the island or further to the east where most of our tropical cyclones come from.
I would like you to also touch on the fact that sometimes today you know that something, you see something is coming, but tomorrow it may divert, and then we just seem to get this impression then that, you know, we safe and we need to stop panicking, and therefore when news comes out again, you kind of get that kind of, you know, nothing ain't gonna happen attitude. I would like you to speak to that and kind of explain how things change at a moment's notice, and we should still be prepared regardless.
Yeah, so meteorology just generally isn't an exact science. So it's a forecast and it's a prediction of what could occur. So when we look at that, we see the potential and the different variabilities. We make informed decisions regarding the potential impact to the country. And things do change. The further out in time that you have a forecast, the less accurate it would be. But of course, we don't want to wait 2 hours before the impact to say this is definitely going to happen. You won't be able to prepare in advance. So giving that information ahead of time, days ahead of time, is really important. We do 5-day forecasts for the general public, which would cover that information statement, etc. We found that we need to, the communication is key. How we say things, how often we update persons using different modes of communications, because everybody don't like to watch a video. Some people like to read, some people like a picture. Doing those different things so that the message gets there, and saying, well, at the initial statement, hey, there's a potential for this. We have low confidence, but just stay aware, and then being able to update. I think in the past, the Met Office might have would have fallen down in the sense of we would have said something and then don't come back. So we have used the approach of you give the update, and then as something changes, you come back and say, well, hey, this is changing, this is happening, this is going to be worse, or this is going to be less. So people can make the plans to suit the impact. So then you don't feel as offset as if you heard 2 days ago, this is definitely happening. It changed and you did all you were supposed to do, then you'll be annoyed 2 days later. But if you are being continuously updated, then you could change your plans to suit. So that's something that we've definitely been doing over the past 5 years to make sure that the public has that confidence in us.
I'd like you to touch on it as well, Robert, because while she's speaking about weather and hurricanes, DEM, I guess, would discuss disaster in general, because there are more things to affect us than just storms and cyclones.
Right, so we have the multi-hazard approach. Why? So many may not know, but the Caribbean region is the second most hazard-prone region in the world. Anything that can go wrong, respect to weather, etc., can go wrong in the Caribbean. So we know that, for example, besides the tropical weather systems, Barbados is very close to the subduction zone. So we are susceptible to earthquakes, susceptible to tsunamis. We are susceptible to volcanic ash, as you know. We're susceptible to man-made hazards. For example, we came through the COVID pandemic. A couple of weeks ago, we had a severe oil spill. There are a lot of things that can impact us in Barbados. So apart from and I do remember there was one event, I don't recall which one it was, but we were in the operations center battling down for a tropical weather system, and we had 2 earthquakes that morning. So here we are preparing for a tropical weather system, and an earthquake happens. And one of the things with the earthquake type event is we don't know when it's coming. So for the hurricane event, where the Met Office says there's a watch, and we do everything, we call meetings and prepare for it, we were able to do that for an earthquake. So when it happens, whatever you have left standing is what you respond with.
Well, disaster and hurricanes, it brings a fear in me, so I could only imagine how it affects other people. How does the police manage persons in a moment like that when there's panic? Something's coming and we're freaked out, they tell us to stay inside, but I need to run here, I need to do this. How do you all manage that?
Well, for us, like Robert was saying, there isn't a legal, thing for people to stay put. We use moral persuasion. We, you don't want to be lost. You don't want your family to be worrying about you, that kind of thing. In a hurricane situation, it is a little more controlled because it's familiar to us. So we know during this time between June and November, you know, you hear DEM giving a lot of updates, and we do our part on our social media website as well, and GIS, y'all do a lot of stuff. So persons kind of are tuned to that, even though we still have that nonchalant attitude in terms of, like Samel could say, if something doesn't come there, oh, they kind of, you know, set us up, and no, it's not coming, you know, so we got, but for an earthquake and those kind of things which are unpredictable, it's going to be harder to do that. You know, we just have to maintain our patrols, try to get persons to understand, well, this is what's happening, and stuff like that, and hope for the best.
And how effective is the communication then among the team? Because you have officers now spread across the island, you know, doing various things. Things are changing, things are happening. How do you communicate effectively?
But for something like that, we utilize what we call the incident command system. That's something that has been working for us well over time, and we try wherever possible to engage it, where you have an overall incident commander, and then there are cells coming out of that. So for instance, you have an operations cell, a planning cell, and it depends on the length of the issue to be resolved that would determine if you are going to use all those cells or not. The operations cell is the one that is engaged first, because those are the on the ground people. They get to go out, they get to assess, they get to feed back information to the incident commander, because that is the person who, and it may be a multi-agency approach. So more persons may be in there, MET may be in there, DEM may be there, you know, so that he or she has support and can make decisions based on having those persons in there, kind of being liaisons for their team on the outside. So the incident command system has been working for us, and the flow of information is good. Operations control is there. We set a EOC, so that is something that has been working, so that the flow of information, it goes down, and it also returns so that decisions can be made.
I guess I could add to that. So above the incident command system, there's the National Emergency Operations Center, and this center is stood up again by the authority of the Minister of Home Affairs, and this is where there are 3 tiers to this: the executive policy, where the minister sits, or the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister will sit to look at policy decisions. There's an operations group, which is headed by senior member of the Barbados Police Service. The operations group would contain those members within the 17 or so agencies that have emergency support functions, like sheltering, damage assessment, road clearance, etc., etc. They sit in the operations group. They communicate amongst themselves to determine who does what when and what resources are available. Then there's the Public Information Communication Group, which is headed by Government Information Service. And then there's a Telecoms Group, which is headed by the Chief Telecoms Officer. There's a system, an astral radio system, using the UHF radio across Barbados. And at the DM, we communicate with 70 or so stations weekly, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to ensure that they can communicate. We also have the VHF system within the volunteer arm of the emergency management mechanism, and they do their regular communications on a weekly basis as well. So communication assets are there. However, one of the first things that generally present challenges, pose a severe impact, is the lack of communications, because we dependent on cell towers, on antennas with repeaters, etc., etc., etc. But to treat to that, one of the backups is actually the ham radio, which you can string up a dipole antenna and connect the radio to a battery, and you can communicate. The Barbados Citizens Band Radio Association and the Amateur Radio Society of Barbados, they support a lot of that type of amateur radio activity. We also can fall back on cell phone use, etc., because the cell phone generally will operate. The utilities, or the Public Utilities Committee, we have Digicel and Flow, etc., they have what we call cell on wheels that they can deploy to provide cell coverage in certain areas. So communications, although it becomes a challenge, there are particular ways that you can get communication back, at least in certain critical areas. Okay. And then, of course, we now have the low orbit satellite receivers. where you just connect directly to satellite and you can send emails, etc.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have another question from the audience from Bruce Lambert. I understand that the U.S. is planning to restrict the feed from NOAA and their satellites. Is this confirmed? Thank you for your question, Bruce.
That's me again. Right, so as I mentioned, we have the National Hurricane Center. The U.S. is in charge of our region. So each year before the start of the hurricane season, there is a hurricane committee meeting. So all of the heads of offices around the region, our region includes the U.S. and Canada, the Caribbean and Central America. They would meet and have discussions. So during that meeting this year, there was obviously the U.S. government would have spoken about NOAA, representatives from the U.S. would have spoken about what would be happening this hurricane season. So there isn't any fallout this year in relation to the support that the National Hurricane Center would provide. It is an international agreement in relation to what the U.S. does for our region. So that agreement still stands and that is expected to stand throughout this hurricane season.
Okay. We have another question. You're coming fast. Real-time information for the citizenry is critical. The Caribbean is too small not to be sharing information regionally in real time. It's more of a comment. I can put that to the panel.
Yeah, I think I can deal with that one. So within the Caribbean, there's many may know about CDMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. So although it is called an agency, it's really a system of 20 participating states, generally CARICOM states, and then those states that are members of, not directly members of CARICOM, like the British Overseas Territories, for example. And these countries collaborate very, very closely. There's a regional response mechanism that is set up within that system, which includes damage assessment teams, telecommunication teams. We also have the CDRE CARICOM Disaster Relief Unit, which we will talk to Sergeant Stout, I believe, later on, and a number of other what we call surge teams that will go out there and support countries if required. Now, one of the things that happens at the regional level is if there's similar to what happens, the Met Office does for us. When Met Office does that for us, the CDMA system also takes note, because the CDMA headquarters is domiciled in Barbados. So if they're impacted, their Trinidad or Antigua Barbuda is able to then set up a system to support at the regional level as well. So they actually stand up their system, they activate their regional coordination center, and within that center they start to look at scenarios. If this happens, then what do we need then if something else happens, etc. So they run through, just like us, a host of scenarios to prepare themselves for if Barbados says we need a support for our EOC, we need support for something. Because sometimes what we don't realize is that each of us here are human beings. We will be impacted ourselves. And as we were discussing earlier, have been deployed to areas where those people who are on first shift were on first shift. There was nobody else coming for second shift or third shift. So you were in position for 3 weeks almost, some persons. So this is where the regional system comes in to provide support to a country that is severely impacted. Because the country being impacted, buildings, etc., means that we ourselves are impacted. And if we're impacted, then what does impact mean? Does it mean that we're injured, that we're incapable of coming out? Does it mean that our family are impacted, etc.? So there's something that we need to always be aware of, that how are we going to respond if we ourselves are impacted in severe impact, how do we treat to that? So there is, to answer that question, there is a system that allows for that regional communication. Very recently as well, CDMA, through some of their partners, implemented a radio system that increases the level of telecommunications or radio communications across the region. So we do communicate on a regular basis.
You mentioned earlier about possible disruptions and inefficient communication due to a number of factors. What happens then, though? We didn't really go into that. What happens when those communication methods are down, where we need to get that information from the other countries and within our own nation?
Well, as I indicated, we do have the ham radio operators who provide radio communication between countries as well. So we also do that on a weekly basis. We communicate with many of the other countries using the HF frequency. And then the low orbit satellite receivers There are a number of them across the region as well, or sat phones, etc. So there are means to communicate. There are ways to communicate with the other countries.
You mentioned the radios, because I recently went to your open day, and I was, I met with the guys from the Amateur Radio Association, and I would have been learning more about how that works, and they would have mentioned other persons logging on to the frequencies and maybe causing disruption. So I think you might want to understand that a bit more. What happens then? And is there legislation governing that as well, especially during a disaster?
There is the Telecoms Union and the Telecom Association has legislation that governs that, but it's how do you regulate it? So I'm interfering with a frequency, but you don't know where I am. How do you, besides telling me get off the radio, or changing my frequency and not telling what frequency I'm on, excuse me, how do you deal with something like that?
Is that any role for the police to play in that aspect?
Well, we do have a telecommunications unit that manages our own telecommunications. I have not looked at the act, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But I wouldn't want to speak out of turn on that because I'm not sure. So that's something that I would have to look at.
Okay, so we are going to take a short break right now, but stay with us and continue sending in your questions and comments. And when we return, we'll be joined by 2 new guests.
Yearly, the Caribbean faces the threat of storms, killer hurricanes, and other natural disasters. With the impact of climate change, the trend is predicted to increase. What would you do if Barbados were impacted by a hurricane? How would you survive?
The reason I joined the DEO is because I wanted to make a difference within my community and somewhat give back to this island, Barbados. Disaster management is a passion of mine, one of them, and I think that it is much needed. We look at disasters as hurricanes only, but a disaster is more than a hurricane. We can have natural and man-made hazards which can incur flooding, we can have the hurricanes, and we can have accidents, oil spills, you name it. Anybody can volunteer, whether you be a first aider, a nurse, retired police, retired fireman, and just want to give back to your community.
When disaster strikes, DEO volunteers are the first help that may arrive in stricken communities. DEO volunteers can be the difference between total catastrophe and simple misfortune. Be the difference in your community. Join the DEO in your area today.
If a hurricane were to pass tomorrow, would you be ready? No? Honestly, hurricane preparation takes a long time and it can be a bit much. So let's start preparing today. Stock up on essential supplies like water, non-perishable food, and batteries. Secure your home by reinforcing windows, doors, and roofs. Stay informed by signing up for weather alerts and following local news updates. Create a family emergency plan and practice it with your loved ones. Reach out to neighbors, especially those who may need assistance during a storm. With early preparation and teamwork, we can face the hurricane season with confidence. Let's get ready together and stay safe, Barbados.
Did you know that flooding can be caused by littering? Every snack bag or plastic bag you toss into the streets can find its way into our drains, causing them to become blocked. The improper disposal of waste or rubbish at an inappropriate location can be defined as littering. Although littering is illegal in Barbados and is a punishable offense, some individuals can be seen tossing their litter from vehicles, dumping their garbage on open lots, and even, in some cases, throwing dead animals in open canals. These unsightly practices need to stop, since they pose health risks and can even cause significant flooding, especially during the hurricane season.
Are you building, renovating, or want to secure the roof of your home? Talk to a qualified contractor about installing hurricane straps to your roof. Hurricane straps are not expensive and can make a great difference during a hurricane or severe rain event. Building Maintenance Supervisor at the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, Beryl, tells us why hurricane straps are important.
If you can picture just having your hands over the entire house and holding it with your thumbs at the bottom, that's exactly what every single strap is supposed to do. It's supposed to hold over the member and tie it to the member that's below it. All in every case.
You need to make sure that you buy the number of straps suggested by your contractor. Mr. Innes explains.
If you do not put in enough straps, the challenge is that in the areas where you are vulnerable, it will start to take off the roof in that direction, and then the entire roof would go. Or it would damage it in a way that only those that are held down stays down, and those that are not held down will go away.
Welcome back to In Focus. For those of you now logging on, tonight we are discussing how Barbados responds to hurricanes and natural disasters. Joining our panel now are Reverend Stephen Scott, Deputy Chief Education Officer for Planning and Development and Deputy Shelter Warden, and Colour Sergeant Hilroy Stout of the Barbados Defence Force. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, earlier we would have alluded to the number of agencies that the DEM and the Met Office works with to get the information out and make sure Barbadians are ready and prepared. And one such department is the Ministry of Education. You guys have responsibility for the shelters across the island. Can you please tell us about that, your role with regards to the shelters?
Yes, so most of the shelters are actually our public secondary schools and some primary schools, but also there are some private shelters as well. So every year, as we begin the process, we have a team that goes around to all of the shelters, whether Category 1 or Category 2, and we review those shelters to see whether we need to improve on what is occurring there. We look at the tanks, we make sure that the shutters are there, we make sure that the other aspects of the facilities are in place. And then, of course, we begin our training and retraining of all of the shelter wardens, deputy shelter wardens, emergency shelter wardens, and actually our shelter wardens would be our principals for the most part, and the deputy principals would be our deputy shelter wardens, but then our emergency shelter wardens also come from within the nearby community. But at the private areas, we do have those persons who are also shelter wardens who are not in those positions.
At which stage in the communication process of a pending disaster or hurricane does the team be activated?
Well, as soon as the word is given, the chief shelter warden, she's contacted, and that happens to be the chief education officer, and then she mobilizes her team to ensure that everything is in place.
Is there any thought process that goes into the locations of the shelters?
Well, we do want to ensure that there are shelters in every parish. There's at least one shelter in every parish. But also it has to do with the facilities and what is available so that we can make sure that persons are sheltering safely where they are.
Okay, so you mentioned the principals are there. Who are some of the other staff? Because I mean, you're going to have a lot of people at these locations.
Yes. So this is where the entire education sector comes into play, because then we have those who would man the shelters, and most of them are teachers. So that is part of the requirement where we're teachers, it would seem, during the term, and then during the hurricane season we become the shelter wardens.
Interesting. So we have the Barbados Defense Force on hand. Can you please tell us what's the role of the Barbados Defense Force during and after, even before?
Okay, so the Barbados Defense Force is one of the critical stakeholders within the whole emergency management system within Barbados. And even prior to the hurricane season, we go through a series of steps to ensure that we have teams that are able to meet the needs of any eventuality. So if you cast your mind back to early in the year, when the fire service conducted their hurricane exercise, the Barbados Defense Force joined with them so that we could test all the capacities within the force, from our DART teams, which is our damage assessment and recce teams, to our rescue teams, to our roots clearance teams. And again, these teams might seem in name a bit short, but these are the reason why we're able to assist Barbados and be able to return Barbados to a sense of normalcy in the shortest possible time.
Okay, so you work hand in hand with the police as well when it comes to security matters?
Yes, so as part of our mandate and part of the whole system, we also have in play a series of teams that their job is to support the ministry of, so we have, for instance, we call it the military assistance to the civil power, which is the police, and also the military assistance to the civil ministries, which is the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. So in the aspect of the Barbados Police Service, we provide security assistance, be it for riot control, be it for key installation guard, be it for ensuring that the airport is secure, the prison, and also the seaport as well.
I note that the Barbados Defense Force is also part of the teams that you would have mentioned that not only assist Barbados but also assist the other islands. And you know what, sometimes we're impacted more than likely other islands are impacted. How do you manage the resources in a situation like that?
Well, firstly, we ensure that home is safe. And one of the things is to ensure that Barbados, the impact, no matter what level the impact is, we beat home drums beat first, and everybody say that. But then as part of the regional response mechanism, the Barbados Defense Force partners with SEDEMA and the regional security system as well. So we provide, be it security contingent, or we provide artisans who's made up of masons, carpenters, electricians. And earlier, you know, we spoke about telecommunications. So we form part of the CDRU, and we also provide that critical to be able to link back countries to get the necessary information and get the correct help that they need.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a question coming in right now. This one is from Janelle Spencer. With regard to the question asked earlier about penalties for disregarding a national shutdown, can an employee be penalized for leaving their workplace at a reasonable time to get home? Robert.
That's a loaded question. Myself not being an employer, what we advocate though is that agencies, departments have their own contingency plan. And your plan should be saying, hey, at a watch, this is what we need to do. These are the people that need to go home, these people that need to stay in place, because invariably, depending on what you're doing, if you run in a hotel or whatever, you might need staff to remain in place to look after guests, etc. So your contingency plan, your business contingency plan, has to then determine who needs to go home and at what stage, etc. And the employers also need to be cognizant of where people live, the size of the families, the conditions, if there are any vulnerable persons within that family, etc. And have these conversations now with the staff to determine who might need to go Because again, as I indicated earlier, we think that everybody will be able to stay and do a job as well as you want to do it under these conditions. But there may be persons who need to get home, who have an elderly parent at home or somebody who needs their assistance, etc. So my recommendation, and we do this often because we do have presentations, talks, etc. We assist persons in developing their own contingency plans as well, business continuity contingency plans, is to have the conversation with the employers, frank and honest conversations, and determine who needs to go, at what stage they may need to go, etc. Because there will be areas, conditions where people will need to go. So that's one of the things that I can say, but I would not be able to tell you if you go what the repercussions will be if you defy an employer's request to stay.
Okay, I hope that answers your question as much as possible, Janelle. Okay, I know that we always promote being prepared. That's our main message. Be prepared, be prepared. But sometimes I think we get a little complacent, and we maybe need a reminder. And I think sometimes a visual kind of helps along. Can you, each of you, I want to share your experience with Beryl, Hurricane Beryl last year. I know that obviously you're going to come from different perspectives, but I would like to hear how, as a representative of your organization, what your experience was like.
Well, I think
we're going to start with Robert and come around.
So I want to alleviate that a little bit, because I've had 8 deployments across the region, right? And these are generally post-tropical weather system impacts. But every time I deploy, I see my friend Color Sergeant stuck there waiting for me. But what happens is that each event is different. So you can have 2 hurricanes of the same category presenting different issues in the country. Barbados has been spared so far in that we've had brushes, quote unquote brushes, with tropical weather systems. We've not had a direct impact of a severe weather system. I was talking earlier to Samelka about the Cat 5, because we realize we get a lot of Cat 5s now. But a Cat 5 is anything above 150 miles, and so you can go to 400 miles an hour, that's still a Cat 5. So those type of events are the ones that are really, really concerning, because in the past, most of the infrastructure was rated to Category 3. We know Category 3, I think Ivan was a Category 3 that decimated, devastated Grenada. So I say that to say that most of if not all, the events are different. Beryl for us in Barbados presented some significant challenges, as indicated earlier, with respect to coastal inundation, coastal challenges. Across the region, we've seen where, for example, in British Virgin Islands, a lot of the damage was done by storm surge and by intense winds. So one of the things about the hurricane threat is that we measure hurricanes by wind speed and wind speed only. But you're going to get in there some lower pressures, you can get precipitation, you're going to get tornadoes, you're going to get the secondary impacts of some fires, etc. All these things, flying debris, all these things the hurricane is going to bring. So apart from the hurricane itself, there are all these secondary impacts that we have to look out for. And even when the system leaves us, then there's no knock-on impacts that could then, so we might survive the storm and get impacted by something else. So I say that to say that oftentimes what we see or what we recognize is not what's going to be consistent across the board. Ivan, for example, in St. Vincent and Grenadines, Beryl impacted St. Vincent and Grenadines, 4 sister islands impacted, Grenada. So the impacts that we saw there, honestly, if that impact had happened in Barbados, we would be in severe issues.
What did you see? Tell us what you saw.
So if you take a piece of sandpaper and just rub it across any surface, then look at that surface after, and you can imagine that's what we saw in those countries. Except that there was debris strewn all over the place. There were vessels, boats, and roads that really should not be there. There were piers that were destroyed. There was a lot of debris and water. A lot of roofs were off. So we talk about hurricane straps. Hurricane straps are one of the mechanisms to secure roofs. But from what we've seen, the hurricane straps only go onto rafters, to keep the rafters together. But the roof itself, the galvanized roof, oftentimes if it's not screwed in or not applied securely, that can go as well. So what you saw is a lot of roofs off. Hurricane straps on buildings, but a lot of roofs off. So there is a lot more that we have to do as well to increase our resilience when we talk about the use of hurricane straps. Hurricane straps are very effective, but we need to also go the other mile to make sure that they remain in place, or that the roof remains in place. Right? The good thing about them is that if the roof goes, the rafters are there, you can affix galvanized too, or tarpaulin too, etc. But again, what we saw was, I want to say, heart-wrenching, because wherever you see there's somebody that was impacted by that. The people who don't have any place to sleep. There are cases where people had passed away in houses and nobody knew until you start to trace the extent to realize that there was a person who passed away in that house or whatever. People in shelters, whatever building was left standing becomes a shelter. Some shelters were impacted. So it is nothing, and again, every event that you respond to or you go to, it's different. It is really different. There are cases where we would have seen, and which was interesting, boats, the boat in the center of the road, and people actually using the boat now to hang out the clothes and stuff on, etc. Because there was no place for you to live.
I imagine that you would have also had many deployments, as Captain Herwood would have mentioned, but zeroing in on Beryl particularly, what was your experience like?
Beryl. I remember Beryl because Beryl was different in a lot of different areas. One, if you compare Beryl to like Irma or even Elsa for home, when Elsa was passing, everybody was quiet, everybody was calm and said, okay, Elsa's gonna pass. And Elsa passed, a little water, a little wind. For Beryl, I remember standing on the balcony at the base and watching a plastic bag on the line. And the guys were saying, how strong is that plastic bag? And then another guy said, well, look at the paling. The paling gone and plastic bag still on the line. And we joked about it for about 3 or 4 hours until we got the all clear. And then we got the other call that St. Vincent and the Grenadines and also Grenada required our assistance. We packed our bags and we were off in a couple of days' time. On reaching, passing Beckway, we was like, okay, it's not that bad. We can see houses. But then we were told, you know, Beckway was spared a lot of the damage. Until we got further down, we saw the impact on Canawan and Union and Myro and Petite Martinique. And I can remember going into Union, when I got off the boat, there were some people there, and they just started on the pier, and I was like, okay, what next? And for us, and for me particularly, sorry, that drove home when you asked for preparedness, because then I can remember calling home a couple of days after, and I said, you know what, anybody put your passports? Anybody bought anything, tin goods? And I heard, no, we good, God is a Bajan. And I said, you know, well, I hope God is not only a Bajan, that he's also a member of the St. Vincent and Grenadines, he's from Grenada, because what we saw, words cannot explain it at that point in time. Leaving Union, going into Canawan, on approach to Canawan, the boat ride was very quiet. It was almost like, what is this? And I must say and commend the resilience of the people of the Caribbean, because when we got off the boat, everybody was willing to work. And it drove home that we must be prepared not only for severe hurricanes, but also sudden impact disasters, and especially like Beryl, where Beryl impacted 5 islands at the same time. And Barbados, I mean, we were not spared, as we would like to call it, because we saw the impact on the fishing industry. We saw what happened on the coast, where the coastline, if you give Beryl another hour or 2, you could not recognize. And that drove home the point as well that we take things for granted, and we must step up our level of preparation. We must put that plan in place. Captain Hero spoke about having a plan for businesses, but I would urge families to have a plan at home. Know where the hurricane shelter is, know when to leave, know what to take, and also have that backup power. You know, sometimes just having a flashlight could save a lot of undue stress. And that was one of the things that we saw in Canada One and Union where there wasn't that. So for me, Beryl really touched deep.
What about your experience within the shelters?
Well, I actually was not in this position back then because we have Category 1s and there's some Category 1s that are manned by those principals and other persons. So I do know that they had to go out, they had to stand up the shelters, and then we got the reports of persons actually coming to the shelters. I think we had more persons during that time than ever before in terms of coming to the shelters, and the chief having to engage with all the shelter wardens and make sure that everything was in place and ensure that all persons who came, that they were safe, that all of the shutters were up, the generators were working, and some shelters actually provided some sort of food for persons who didn't have any food, although that is part of the regulation. You're encouraged to bring your dry goods, etc. with you. So I know they had to deal with that. Fortunately, that is also my celebration of my wedding anniversary. So I actually was at a hotel. And that was an experience on the beach, on the shore, and to see the waves increase, and then the actual coconut trees, they were literally down to the ground, and watch the water come towards you. I mean, it literally came right to the step. And that was an experience, hoping that it wouldn't flood, although the hotel had prepared well for us to shelter in place.
We have a question coming in right now, but I want to ask you first. I want you to tell the audience what they need to take to the shelters quickly before we go on to our question.
Well, they need to make sure that they have their go bag, and that go bag should have in, as you heard, with the perishable things that they, in terms of eating, they should have some sort of water with them, at least for one day. They should have their medication. If they have medication, they must have that. They must have all of those aspects that are important to them, their ID cards and we heard about the passport and other necessary documents that they should have, and ensure that they have some sort of clothing with them, they have a blanket, they have, you heard about the torchlight, batteries. Those are some of the things that they should have in that go bag, ready to take with them to the shelter.
Okay, thank you. And I hope you guys took note of that. Okay, we have a question coming in from Mercy. A solar storm could significantly affect the communications all around the world. We should be prepared for any event from now. It's a comment. Robert.
That is an interesting comment. Yes, I suspect so. But as indicated earlier, there are several means and modes of communication. So if a solar storm impacts our radio telecommunications, then there's still some aspects of satellite telecommunication that might be able to use, or the same HF radio, etc. So yes, that it's possible, but there may be contingencies. We've never had that before, but there may be contingencies that we can employ to get that communication out.
Okay. We have another question from Nicholas Rock. Who can you notify about drains in your area that are blocked or partially blocked? Thank you for that question, Nicholas.
I suppose that comes to me again. Right, and this, I'm glad that question is asked, because this is a challenge that we find even where we have a flood warning or flood, either flash flood or flood event, where several drains are blocked. We remove grills and we see a lot of bottles and garbage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that we ask persons to do is inform the Ministry of Public Works and Transport early. I know there's an app that I saw recently where persons can post information on that app. I think it's called, well, I don't want to advertise it, so I'm not going to call the name of it. But there are ways and means to do that. You can also call the Department of Emergency Management and inform us, and we will get on to the agencies that have responsibility to ensure that they go and take a look and try to clear those drains, because one of the biggest challenge we have, block drains in a flood situation.
Okay. All right, before we wrap up, I just want to have your final comments as you advise Barbadians to be prepared and be aware and tune into the correct communications channels for the messaging with regards to any pending disasters or systems. I'm going to start from this end and come around this time.
Like I said before, being prepared is every day. And we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years where that every year we say hurricane season starts a bit early. And we have had systems out of the normal 1st of June, which tells us that, we must be prepared. We must, when you go to the supermarket, if you're accustomed buying 5 tunas, buy 6 and put down 1 every week. Buy, there's bottled water you can buy, there's collapsible containers. And also look and encourage others in the community. Captain here spoke about the block drains, but getting together in the community to help clear these drains as well can ease some of the pressure, because we must be honest that the system cannot be able to get to every single drain, every single household, but if one encourages one, then it helps ease the process along.
All right. I would want to advise that they know where the hurricane shelters are. There's a hurricane shelter booklet that they can access. It's in soft copy. You can go on the ministry's website to access that, mes.gov.bb. And other areas, I know the DEM would say they have access to it as well. Ensure that they have that go bag prepared to go at any eventuality. Make sure that they've packed, and make sure that they're ready to go and even assist at the hurricane shelter, because sometimes you do have to ask persons to assist when they do arrive.
Okay, thank you. Captain Herwood.
So for me, I want to echo the comments by my 2 colleagues here, and also to remind that preparedness begins with the individual, and it begins at the grassroots level, at the community level. Let me say that. So if individuals prepared, then you can prepare your family. So things like your family disaster plan, knowing where the shelters are, knowing how to escape your home, etc. Then your community plan. So knowing how to escape the community and how the community can communicate, can collaborate to clear those drains, etc. And then the business plan. So if I don't have an individual plan or a family plan, then being part of the business continuity plan is going to be challenging, because they need to know when they need to go to work, what I need to do at work, at what time. So I need to make sure that my family's plan is activated and is in sync with what is happening. I also want to indicate that there will be a post-impact period. And oftentimes for us, we've gone into a shutdown and then we go back to work the day after, etc. So we've gotten accustomed to the system clearing and we go back out. But there may be a time when that may not be the case, and there will be certain things that would impact upon us. Block roads, trees down, our electricity poles down, energized transformers, and a whole bunch of things that we have to be aware of. Teams on the road doing stuff, knowing when the all clear is given, because I expected this question to be asked, but it didn't come, which is not a bad thing. But knowing when the all clear is given, when to leave your home, because there are times when you wouldn't hear guy talk about communication, when there may not be communication, and you have to know within yourself, when is it safe for me to leave my home? Because there are cases where people are holding on, as we say, for dear life until the storm abates, and then you try to get out. You're not hearing anything from anybody because communications are done within that period. So we've heard of cases where people were under the sofas because the roof had gone, they were in the closet, they were in the bathroom, etc. Holding on to windows and doors so that they wouldn't blow out, etc. Just until the storm let up. So we need to be aware of there are other things, there are a whole bunch of things that can happen. And one of the things that we can do now is look at the case studies, look at what happened in Dominica, look at what happened in Grenada, look at what happened in Virgin Islands, see what people went through, and how, if it were us, how would we go through it. I said people all the time, we need to sit down and close our eyes when we go to bed and run through some scenarios. Not to stress yourself out, but run through some scenarios and see what we would do with given those types of scenarios. They ask the what if questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. It's a lot of information for us to ponder on. And as we wrap up tonight's discussion, one thing is definitely clear. Keeping Barbados safe during hurricane season and in the event of a natural disaster is a team effort. From the decision makers at the top to the men and women on the ground, and yes, you at home, everyone has a role to play. We've heard tonight how shutdowns are triggered, how emergency teams mobilize, how communication is managed, and how the nation reopens safely. We hope to have some more information on that, and we will probably post that information to our social media pages and our website to give you guys some more information on the reopening process. But we've also been reminded that preparedness starts long before the warning is issued and continues well after the disaster passes. A heartfelt thank you to our panelists for their time, insight, and service to the nation. And thank you for joining us for this live episode of In Focus. Stay informed, stay prepared, and most importantly, stay safe. Good night.